Hey everyone, and welcome to Easy English Talk. We're so glad you're here.
Thanks for joining us. Let's get started with today's topic.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to English Learning Podcast, the place where you can improve your English step by step in a simple, natural, and enjoyable way, and where we help you become more confident every single day when you speak English.
Hi, everyone. We're so happy that you are here with us today because today's topic is something that many English learners are really curious about, and honestly, it's also one of the most exciting parts of learning English.
That's absolutely right, Julia. Today, we are going to talk about something very personal and very practical at the same time, and that is how I got my American accent.
Yes, and I know a lot of you listening right now are probably thinking, can I really sound like a native speaker? Or maybe you are wondering, is it possible for me to improve my accent even if I started late?
Exactly. And let me tell you this very clearly from the beginning. Yes, it is possible, and no, you do not need to be perfect to sound natural, confident, and easy to understand.
And in this episode, Jason is going to share his real journey, step by step, including the mistakes he made, the struggles he faced, and the simple techniques that actually helped him improve his accent over time.
Yes, I'm going to be completely honest with you because I want you to see that improving your accent is not about talent. It's not about being special, but it's about practice, patience, and using the right methods every day.
And don't worry, we are going to explain everything in a very simple and clear way, so even if you are a beginner, you can understand and start using these tips in your daily life.
So if you've ever felt shy about your accent, or if you've ever been afraid of speaking because you think your pronunciation is not good enough, then this episode is especially for you.
Stay with us until the end, because you're not only going to learn how Jason improved his American accent, but you're also going to learn how you can start improving yours today.
All right, let's get started and go back to the beginning of my journey. All right, before I share my story, I think it's really important to talk about something that many English learners often misunderstand. And that is the idea of having a perfect accent, because a lot of people believe that if they don't sound exactly like a native speaker, then their English is not good enough, which is simply not true.
Yes, that's such an important point, Jason, because I've seen so many learners feel nervous or even afraid to speak English just because they think their accent is not perfect, and that fear actually stops them from improving.
Exactly. And the truth is, your accent is only one part of communication. And it is not the most important part because what really matters is that people can understand you clearly and easily when you speak.
So you're saying that clarity is more important than sounding American or British, right?
Yes, absolutely, Julia. If your pronunciation is clear and your message is easy to understand, then you are already doing a great job, even if you still have a strong accent from your native language.
I think that's very encouraging for learners because it takes away a lot of pressure and it helps them focus on what really matters instead of trying to be perfect all the time.
That's right. And here's something very important to remember. Having an accent is completely normal because everyone in the world has an accent, even native speakers. So you should never feel ashamed of the way you sound.
That's a great reminder, and I think it also helps learners feel more confident because they realize they don't need to change everything about their voice.
Exactly. And improving your accent should not be about losing your identity, but about making your speech clearer, smoother, and more natural, so that communication becomes easier and more comfortable for you and for others.
So instead of saying, I want to sound perfect, learners should say, I want to sound clear and confident, right?
Yes, that's the perfect mindset, Julia. Because when you focus on progress instead of perfection, you actually improve faster and enjoy the process much more.
I love that, and I think it's a great way to start this topic before we hear your personal story.
All right, now that we understand why accent matters, but not too much, let me take you back to the beginning of my journey and how everything started for me. All right, so let me take you back to the beginning of my journey because honestly, when I first started learning English, I did not have anything close to an American accent, and in fact, my pronunciation was very basic, sometimes unclear, and often strongly influenced by my native language.
Really? That's surprising because now you sound so natural and fluent. But I think a lot of learners will feel relieved to hear that you didn't start perfectly.
Oh, not at all, Julia, not even close. And I clearly remember that when I tried to speak English in the beginning, I felt very shy and uncomfortable because I knew that my pronunciation was not good, and sometimes people had difficulty understanding me, which made me even more nervous.
That sounds like something many learners experience, especially the feeling of being afraid to speak because of how they sound.
Exactly. And because of that fear, I used to avoid speaking as much as possible. And instead, I focused too much on grammar and reading, thinking that if I knew more rules and more vocabulary, my speaking would automatically improve. But that didn't really happen.
So even though you were studying English, your speaking and accent were not improving much?
Yes, that's right. And that was very frustrating for me, because I could understand a lot when I read or listened, but when it was time to speak, I felt stuck, and my accent didn't sound natural at all.
I think many listeners will relate to that because it's a very common situation for English learners.
Yes, and another mistake I made was that I didn't pay attention to how native speakers actually sounded. So I was not really learning the rhythm, the stress, or the natural flow of English. And because of that, my speech sounded slow and unnatural.
So it wasn't just about words, it was also about how you were saying them, right?
Exactly, Julia. And at that time, I didn't realize how important that was. And I didn't have a clear method or plan to improve my accent, so I was just learning without direction, which made my progress very slow.
That makes sense, and I think it's a powerful message for learners because it shows that struggling at the beginning is completely normal.
Absolutely. And if you are listening right now and you feel the same way, I want you to know that I was in the same position, and things only started to change when I discovered a better way to practice.
That sounds interesting. So, what exactly changed for you?
Well, that's where the turning point comes in, and that's what I'm going to share next. So, let me tell you about the moment when everything started to change for me. Because for a long time, I was learning English without real progress in my speaking and accent, and I honestly felt stuck and a little frustrated, like I was putting in effort but not getting the results I wanted.
I think that's a very common feeling, Jason, especially for learners who study for a long time but still don't feel confident when they speak. So, what exactly changed for you?
Well, one day I realized something very important, and that is this. I was learning English, but I was not training my ears and my mouth the right way, because I was focusing too much on reading and grammar, and not enough on listening and speaking.
That's a powerful realization because many learners think that studying more grammar will automatically improve their speaking, but that's not always true.
Exactly. And the moment I understood that speaking is a skill, just like playing a sport or learning music. I started to change my approach. And instead of just studying English, I started to practice English actively every single day.
So it was more about changing your method, not just working harder, right?
Yes, absolutely, Julia. Because I didn't suddenly become more talented or more intelligent, I just started using better techniques, and I became more consistent with my practice, especially when it came to listening and repeating what I heard.
That sounds like a big shift, and I'm sure it made a huge difference in your progress.
It really did. And another important thing that changed was my mindset, because I stopped being afraid of making mistakes. And instead, I started to see mistakes as a normal and necessary part of learning, especially when improving my accent.
I love that, because when you remove the fear of mistakes, you give yourself the freedom to actually improve and grow.
Exactly. And that combination of the right method and the right mindset became the turning point for me. And from that moment, I started to notice real improvement in how I sounded when I spoke English.
That's very inspiring, and I think our listeners are now probably wondering, what exactly did you do after that?
Great question, Julia, because now I'm going to share the exact steps I followed, starting with one of the most important habits that completely changed my accent. All right, so the first and probably the most important step that helped me improve my American accent was something very simple, but extremely powerful. And that is listening a lot, or, as I like to say, listening like crazy. Because I realized that before you can speak like a native speaker, you first need to hear and understand how native speakers actually sound.
That makes so much sense because if you don't hear the correct sounds again and again, it's very hard for your brain to learn them and for your mouth to produce them naturally.
Exactly, Julia. And in the beginning, I was not doing this properly because I would listen passively, like just playing something in the background without really paying attention. But later I understood that active listening is what really makes a difference.
So, what do you mean by active listening? Can you explain that in a simple way for our listeners?
Of course, active listening means that you are fully focused on what you are hearing. So you are paying attention to pronunciation, to how words are connected, to the rhythm, and even to the tone of the speaker, instead of just hearing the words without thinking.
That's a great explanation, and I think it helps learners understand that listening is not just about hearing, but about really noticing how English sounds.
Yes, and I started listening to different types of content every day, like podcasts, movies, interviews, and YouTube videos, and I tried to choose content where I could clearly hear natural American speech, so my ears could get used to that sound.
And did you listen for a long time every day, or was it short practice?
In the beginning, even 15 to 20 minutes of focused listening made a big difference. But the key was consistency, because I did it every single day. And over time, my brain started to recognize patterns in pronunciation and rhythm.
That's very encouraging because it shows that you don't need hours and hours every day. You just need to be consistent and focused.
Exactly. And once your ears start to understand the music of the language, it becomes much easier to copy it. And that leads us to the next step, which is just as important. So after I trained my ears by listening regularly, the next step that really changed my accent was something called shadowing. And this is where I started to copy native speakers as closely as possible, almost like I was becoming their voice for a short time.
That sounds interesting, Jason, but maybe a little difficult for beginners. So, can you explain what shadowing actually looks like in practice?
Of course, Julia. And don't worry, it's actually much simpler than it sounds. because shadowing just means that you listen to a short sentence or phrase and then you repeat it immediately, trying to copy not only the words, but also the pronunciation, the rhythm, the speed, and even the emotion of the speaker.
So it's not just repeating the words, but really trying to sound like the person you are listening to, right?
Exactly. And that's the key difference, because when you focus on copying the sound instead of just saying the words, your mouth starts to learn new movements, and your accent begins to change naturally over time.
I like that idea because it feels more practical and active compared to just studying or memorizing.
Yes, and what helped me a lot was choosing short clips, maybe 5 to 10 seconds, and repeating them several times until I felt more comfortable with the way I sounded. And I didn't try to be perfect, I just tried to get a little closer each time.
That's a very important point because trying to be perfect can make learners feel stressed, but focusing on small improvement makes the process easier and more enjoyable.
Absolutely. And I also used to record my voice and compare it with the original speaker, which helped me notice small differences and improve faster.
That's a great tip because when you hear yourself, you can really understand what you need to improve.
Exactly. And this daily habit of listening and copying slowly trained my mouth to produce more natural American sounds, and it became one of the most powerful tools in my journey.
That's amazing, and I'm sure our listeners can start trying this technique right away.
Yes, and now let's move to the next step, where I focused more deeply on improving specific sounds and pronunciation. So after I started listening more and practicing shadowing, the next step that really helped me improve my American accent was daily pronunciation practice, because I realized that if I wanted to sound more natural, I needed to train my mouth every single day, even if it was just for a short time.
That makes sense because just like any skill, if you don't practice regularly, it's very hard to improve or keep your progress. So, what kind of pronunciation practice did you do?
I focused on small but important things, like individual sounds, word stress, and sentence intonation, and instead of trying to learn everything at once, I chose just a few sounds or words each day and practiced them slowly and clearly.
I like that approach because it feels simple and manageable, especially for beginners who might feel overwhelmed.
Exactly. And one thing that really helped me was speaking out loud, not in my head, because many learners understand English, but they don't train their mouth enough, and that's why their pronunciation doesn't improve.
That's a great point, because speaking out loud builds confidence and helps your mouth get used to new sounds.
Yes, and even practicing for just 10 minutes a day, if you do it consistently, can make a big difference over time. And slowly, your speech starts to sound clearer, smoother, and more natural.
That's very encouraging, and it shows that small daily effort can lead to big results.
Absolutely. And now, let's talk about some common mistakes that learners should avoid while working on their accent. Now let's talk about some common mistakes that many English learners make when trying to improve their accent, because avoiding these mistakes can save you a lot of time and frustration.
Yes, that's very important, because sometimes knowing what not to do is just as helpful as knowing what to do. So, what is the first mistake?
The first mistake is trying to be perfect from the beginning, because when you focus too much on sounding perfect, you become nervous, you overthink, and you actually speak less, which slows down your progress.
That's so true, and I think many learners feel that pressure, especially when they compare themselves to native speakers.
Exactly. And the second mistake is not speaking out loud enough, because many learners spend a lot of time listening or reading, but they don't practice speaking. And without using your voice, your pronunciation will not improve.
Yes, your mouth needs practice just like your brain does. What's another mistake?
Another common mistake is focusing only on grammar and vocabulary, and ignoring pronunciation and rhythm, because even if your grammar is correct, unclear pronunciation can make communication difficult.
That's a really important point because communication is the main goal of language.
Absolutely. And finally, many learners are not consistent. They practice for a few days and then stop. But improving your accent requires small, daily effort over time.
So the key message is don't try to be perfect. Speak more, focus on pronunciation, and stay consistent.
Exactly. And if you can avoid these mistakes, your progress will become much faster and more natural. Before we finish, I want to take a moment to speak honestly with you because improving your accent is not something that happens overnight, and there will be days when you feel like you are not making progress, or when you feel frustrated with how you sound.
Yes, and I think it's very important for learners to hear this because sometimes social media makes it look easy, but in reality, learning to speak clearly and naturally takes time and patience.
Exactly. And if you ever feel stuck, just remember that every small step you take is moving you forward, even if you don't notice it immediately. Because progress in language learning is often slow, but very real.
That's such a powerful reminder because many learners give up too early, just when they are about to improve.
Yes, and I want you to understand that you don't need to sound like a perfect native speaker to be confident and successful in English. You just need to be clear, consistent, and willing to keep practicing.
And it's okay to make mistakes because mistakes are not failures, they are part of the learning process.
Absolutely. So be patient with yourself, trust the process, and keep going. Because if I could improve my accent step by step, then you can do it too.
That's very inspiring, and I hope everyone listening feels more confident and motivated now.
All right, let's quickly review what we learned today. All right, let's quickly review what we talked about today because we covered some very important ideas that can really help you improve your accent step by step.
Yes, let's make it simple and clear so everyone can remember and start using these tips right away.
First, we learned that having a perfect accent is not necessary. And what really matters is speaking clearly and confidently so people can understand you and naturally.
Then, we heard Jason's personal story and how he started with struggles, confusion, and lack of confidence, just like many learners experience in the beginning.
After that, we talked about the turning point, when I changed my method and started focusing more on listening and active practice instead of only studying grammar.
And of course, the 3 key steps were very powerful: listening like crazy, copying native speakers through shadowing, and practicing pronunciation daily in a simple and consistent way.
Exactly. And we also discussed some common mistakes to avoid, like trying to be perfect, not speaking enough, and not being consistent with your practice.
So the final message is very simple: listen more, speak more, don't be afraid of mistakes, and practice a little every day.
Yes, and if you follow these steps with patience and consistency, you will definitely see improvement in your accent over time.
That's a great summary, and I think our listeners are now ready to take action.
Absolutely. And now let's finish with a quick message for all of you. Before we end today's episode, I want to give you a very simple challenge, and I really want you to try it starting today, not tomorrow, not next week, but today, because action is what creates real improvement in your English journey.
Yes, and it doesn't need to be something big or difficult. Even a small step can make a huge difference if you stay consistent with it.
Exactly. So here is your challenge. Choose just one short English video, podcast, or conversation, and practice shadowing it for 10 minutes. Focus on listening carefully, repeating clearly, and trying to match the speaker's rhythm and pronunciation as closely as possible.
And don't worry about being perfect. Just focus on improving a little bit each time you practice, because small daily efforts lead to big, long-term results.
Also, if you enjoyed this episode, make sure to subscribe to our channel English Learning Podcast so you don't miss more lessons like this that can help you improve your speaking, listening, and confidence.
And we would love to hear from you, so please leave a comment and tell us, what is your biggest challenge when it comes to speaking English?
Yes, your feedback helps us create better content for you, and we are here to support you on your English learning journey.
Thank you so much for listening, and we hope you practice today and keep improving every single day.
See you in the next episode. Keep learning, keep practicing, and keep growing your English skills.